close your eyes if you like. There is no need to watch the darkness. Just listen. Let the quiet of your room settle around you like a warm blanket drawn up to the chin. Outside, the world is still, or perhaps it is not. But here, inside this space, we have carved out a small pocket of calm. The hour is late or early, depending on how you measure time by the light of the moon. And it is a good moment, a soft moment, to drift away from the day's noise and into something older, something distant, something that happened a very long time ago on a sea that never sleeps, the Mediterranean Sea. Mare Nostrum, the Romans called it our sea. But no sea is ever truly ours. It is a vast, shifting body of water that has its own moods, its own rhythms, its own quiet hours, and its own furious ones. Tonight, we are going to think about those furious hours and the men who were caught in them. Roman sailors aboard wooden ships far from land, with the sky turning black and the waves rising like restless giants. And the question that we will drift toward, slowly, gently, is this: how did they sleep? You might think that sleep would be impossible in a storm, and you would be mostly right. But the human body is a stubborn thing. It demands rest, even when rest seems foolish. Even when the world is shaking and the wind is howling like a pack of wolves. The Roman sailor, standing on a deck slick with spray, knew this. He knew that sleep was not a luxury, but a necessity, especially in the middle of a voyage that might last for weeks. And so he found his way to sleep in ways that might surprise us. Picture the ship. It is not a grand warship, not a trireme with 3 banks of oars and a bronze ram. Imagine instead a merchant vessel, a corbetta perhaps, with a rounded hull and a single great square sail. It is built for carrying cargo, amphorae of wine, jars of olive oil, sacks of grain, bolts of linen. The deck is crowded with ropes and barrels, and the occasional goat, destined for some far-off market. The crew numbers perhaps a dozen men, plus the captain, who might be the owner of the cargo, or simply a hired master. These men are not heroes from a poem. They are weather-beaten, practical, ordinary. They have calloused hands and salt-crusted beards. They know the sea the way you know the rooms of your home. On a calm night, sleep is easy. The ship rocks gently. The stars are bright. The crew takes turns at the helm and at watch, and the others curl up wherever there is space. Some lie on the deck, using a coil of rope as a pillow. Others crawl into the small hatch that leads to the hold if the cargo leaves room. The hold is dark, warm, and smells of damp wood and clay, and the sweet sour scent of fermenting wine. It is not comfortable, but it is enough. The men sleep in their clothes because there is no reason to change, and because the nights can be cold. They sleep in shifts, 2 or 3 hours at a time, and then they wake to take their turn at the tiller or at the lookout. It is a rhythm as old as sailing itself. But then the storm comes. You know the feeling, perhaps, from a different kind of storm. The pressure in the air. The way the clouds stack themselves in tall, dark towers. The sudden drop in temperature. The Roman sailor knew these signs too, and he knew they meant trouble. The captain would give the order to reef the sail, to reduce its area, or to take it down entirely. The ship would be left to ride the waves under bare masts, or with a scrap of canvas, just enough to keep her pointed into the wind. And then the waiting would begin. The wind would rise, not gradually, but in a sudden howl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sea would change from a surface of gentle swells to a chaos of steep, breaking waves. The ship would climb one wave, shudder at the top, and then slide down the other side with a sickening lurch. Water would crash over the bow, across the deck, sloshing into every crevice. The ropes would groan. The timbers would creak. The whole ship would seem to be a living thing, in pain, struggling to survive. And what of sleep now? The sailor who was off watch would seek shelter. There was no dry place. The deck was awash. The hold might be dry, but it was now a trap. If the ship took on too much water, the hold would fill, and a man trapped below would drown. So most sailors stayed on deck, even when not on duty. They would find a spot behind a bulwark, or against the mast, or in the lee of a cargo box. They would wrap themselves in their cloaks, heavy wool soaked through in minutes, and they would try to rest. But rest is not the same as sleep. Sleep requires a letting go, a surrender. In a storm, the body refuses to surrender. The mind stays alert, listening to the sounds of the ship, waiting for the crack of a breaking spar or the crash of water that might be the end. Yet the body is exhausted, and exhaustion is a powerful force. The Roman sailor learned to sleep in the cracks between moments of terror. He would doze for a few minutes, then be jolted awake by a lurch or a spray of cold water. He would close his eyes again and drift, half-conscious, into a state that was not quite sleep and not quite waking. It was a kind of twilight rest, a shallow breathing of the soul. Some historians believe that Roman sailors used a trick of posture. They would sit on the deck, back against a fixed object, legs stretched out, and they would brace themselves with their arms crossed. This position, they thought, was less likely to be thrown across the deck by a sudden roll. It also, oddly, helped them fall asleep. The tension in the muscles, the constant small adjustments to maintain balance, seemed to lull the body into a trance. It was like the way a mother rocks a child. But here the rocking was violent and unpredictable, and the child was a grown man holding onto the edge of the world. And then there was the matter of the bilge. The bilge was the lowest part of the ship, where water collected. In a storm, the bilge filled quickly, and the crew had to pump or bail constantly. This was not a task for one shift. It was a continuous, desperate chore. A man might be woken from his doze, not by the storm, but by the call to the pumps. He would stumble across the pitching deck, join the line, and work the long wooden handles of the bilge pump, feeling the water slosh beneath his feet. The rhythm of the pump was steady, monotonous, almost hypnotic. And strange as it sounds, some sailors reported that they could actually sleep while pumping. Their bodies worked, their arms moved, their eyes were open, but their minds were somewhere else, in a dark, quiet place of their own making. It was a skill born of necessity. We must remember that sleep for these men was not a private affair. There were no cabins, no doors, no curtains. Sleeping meant lying down among the others, hearing their breathing, their occasional moans, their muttered prayers. In a storm, the crew was a single organism, pressed together, sharing warmth and fear. A man might lean against another man's shoulder, and that other man might not mind, because he was too tired to care. The boundaries of the body blurred. You slept on a stranger's leg, and he slept on your back, and somehow the weight of another person was a comfort against the chaos. It was not romantic, not sentimental. It was simply how humans survive the night. There is a story from a Roman writer, a certain Lucian of Samosata, who sailed from Greece to Italy in the 2nd century AD. He describes a storm so fierce that the sailors gave up all hope. The captain himself lay down on the deck, having surrendered to fate. But Lucian, a passenger, noticed something odd. The sailors, even as the waves towered above them, even as the wind tore at the rigging, began to whisper jokes. They laughed in a hollow way, and they made bets on whether the ship would break in half or simply capsize. And then, one by one, they fell asleep. They slept not because they were brave, but because they had no more energy for fear. The storm would do what it would do. They had done what they could. And so they lay down and closed their eyes. That is the heart of it. Sleep in a storm is not a rest from danger. It is a surrender to it. The Roman sailor, curled in a wet corner of a ship that might be his coffin, would eventually give in to a sleep that was part resignation, part exhaustion, part a kind of ancient wisdom. The sea is vast and old. It does not care about your plans. It does not care about your cargo, or your family waiting in Ostia, or your debts, or your dreams. It only moves, and you move with it. And sleep is the only way to stop fighting for a little while. Some of them did not sleep, of course. Some stayed awake, staring at the black sky, gripping a rope, praying to Neptune or to the Dioscuri, the twin gods who watched over sailors. But most slept because they had to. The body demands it. The body is a tyrant that way. Now, imagine the dawn after such a night. The storm passes as suddenly as it came. The clouds break. The sun appears, low and watery. The sea calms. The ship is battered but afloat. And the sailors stir, one by one, stiff and cold and hungry. They look at each other. They see the exhaustion in each other's faces, the red eyes, the cracked lips, and they do not say much. There is no celebration, no loud cheer. They simply begin the work of repairing what is broken, of wringing out their cloaks, of starting a small fire on a bed of sand to cook a meal. And later, when the ship is on course again, and the sea is gentle, they will find their spots and sleep properly, deeply, without fear. That is the rhythm of life at sea, and it has not changed all that much in 2,000 years. The ships are different now. We have steel hulls and engines and radar. But the sea is the same. The storms are the same. And the need to sleep, to shut down the mind and let the body drift, is the same. So as you lie here in your comfortable bed, with the sheets smooth and the pillows soft, think of those Roman sailors. Think of the hard wood under their backs, the cold salt spray on their faces, the smell of wet wool and rope. Think of them sleeping, not in spite of the storm, but because of it. Because somewhere deep in our bones, we are still those sailors, still riding the waves, still trying to find a moment of rest in the middle of chaos. And tonight, you have that moment. The storm is far away. The sea is calm. The ship of your bedroom is still. So let your mind drift like a Roman corbetta on a gentle swell. Let the story carry you forward to the next part of the voyage, where we will look more closely at the spaces they slept in, the curious tools they used, and the strange lullabies of the ancient Mediterranean night. But for now, simply breathe. In, out. The wind is just outside the window, but it is friendly tonight. It is a gentle wind, a sleeping wind. And so are you. And so you are, drifting. Let us stay with that feeling for a while. Let us stay with the Roman sailor, not in the middle of the storm, but in the moments just before it. Because the approach of a storm over the Mediterranean was itself a kind of gradual process, a slow filling of the world with unease. The sky would change first. The deep blue would turn to a pale, milky gray. The horizon would become indistinct, as if the sea and the sky were melting into each other. The wind would shift, and the temperature would drop. A sailor, even half asleep, would feel it. He would open his eyes and look up, and he would know something was coming. And in those moments, there was a particular kind of silence. The birds would disappear. The waves would become oddly flat, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. The ship would drift, and the crew would move differently. They would not shout. They would not run. They would simply begin the preparations methodically, with the tired efficiency of men who had done this many times before. Sails were reefed. Loose cargo was tied down. The rudder was checked. And each man found his place. There was a quiet dignity in that, a calm before the chaos. And in that calm, some sailors would take the opportunity to sleep, because they knew that once the storm hit, sleep would become a rare and difficult thing. So they would lie down, even as the first drops of rain began to fall, and close their eyes for a few minutes, storing up rest like a camel stores water. Imagine that. Imagine lying on a wooden deck, feeling the first tremors of the storm, and deliberately letting go of consciousness. It takes a certain trust, or perhaps a certain resignation. It takes a body that has learned to obey its own needs. The Roman sailor had that body. He had been shaped by the sea. His muscles remembered the roll of the waves. His skin was rough with salt. His lungs had learned to breathe in the spray, and his mind had learned to let go of control. He could sleep in a storm because he had slept in storms before. He had survived them. And survival, when it happens often enough, becomes a kind of habit. But let us not romanticize it too much. The sleep of a Roman sailor in a storm was not a peaceful sleep. It was a ragged, interrupted, uncomfortable sleep. It was the sleep of a man who might not wake up. And yet, it was still sleep. It still served its purpose. It still gave the body a chance to reset, to repair, to prepare for the next round of terror. There is a story from the Roman poet Ovid, who was exiled to the Black Sea and had to endure a long voyage in winter. He wrote about the sailors on his ship, how they would fall asleep while standing, leaning against the mast, their heads nodding forward, their hands still clutching ropes. He called them the waking dead, and he said that their sleep was like a sickness, a temporary madness that took them out of the world. But he also said that he envied them, because he, the poet, could not sleep. He lay awake, composing verses in his head, trying to write his way through the fear. And the sailors, with their simple minds and stronger bodies, just slept. Perhaps that is the key. The sailors were not poets. They did not spend their nights composing verses or worrying about the meaning of the storm. They were practical men. They dealt with the immediate. And when the immediate was too much, they shut down. They slept. They did not analyze their dreams. They did not remember them in the morning. They just slept, and then they woke, and they went back to work. There's a kind of wisdom in that, a kind of survival instinct that does not overthink. The modern mind might call it dissociation or denial, but the ancient body called it rest. Now, let us consider the specific places where these men slept. Not all spots on a Roman merchant ship were equal. The most desirable spot in a storm was near the center of the ship, where the movement was least violent. The bow rose and fell dramatically, throwing men forward and back. The stern was where the helmsman stood, and there was no rest there. But the middle, near the main mast, was relatively stable. The mast itself was a massive piece of timber, firmly rooted in the keel, and it could be used as a backrest. A sailor could sit against it, his legs stretched out, his head leaning back, and he could feel the mast tremble with the force of the wind, but it held. It was a point of stability in a shifting world. Some sailors preferred the lee side of the ship, the side away from the wind. There, the rain was less direct, the spray less constant. They would huddle against the bulwark, a low wall of planks that ran along the edge of the deck. It was not comfortable, the wood was rough, and the caulking between the planks was often leaking, but it offered a little shelter. Others would crouch under the rowing benches, if the ship was a small one with oars. During storms, the oars were usually shipped, pulled inside, and the benches became a kind of roof, a low ceiling over a dark space. A man could crawl under there into the shadow and feel a false sense of security. But the most surprising sleeping spot was the ship's boat. Roman merchant ships carried a small tender called a scapha, which was used for going ashore or for emergencies. In a storm, this boat was usually lashed to the deck, upside down, to keep it from washing overboard, and some sailors would crawl underneath it, into the space between the upturned hull and the deck. It was cramped and dark, and the air was thick with the smell of pitch and wood, but it was dry. The upturned boat acted like a roof, keeping off the rain and most of the spray. And there was something about that enclosed space that felt safe. It reminded a man of being a child, hiding under a table. The storm could rage above, but under the boat, there was a pocket of stillness. Historians have found references to this practice in Roman shipping documents, where slaves and free sailors alike sought refuge under the boat during bad weather. It was not official. It was not approved, but it was done. And then there were the tools of sleep. By tools, I mean the small objects that a Roman sailor might use to make his rest a little easier. A cloak, of course, was essential, but a sailor might also carry a small leather bag filled with rags or wool, which he could use as a pillow. He might have a piece of oilcloth, waxed to make it waterproof, which he could spread over himself. He might have a knife tucked into his belt, which he would keep close even in sleep, because on a ship full of strangers, you never knew. And he might have a small amulet, a little bronze pendant of a dolphin or a trident, which he believed would protect him from drowning. These amulets were common. They were worn around the neck or tied to the wrist. And in the dark, during a storm, a sailor might touch his amulet, feel its smooth surface, and that touch would help him sleep. It was not the amulet itself, of course. It was the act of touching something familiar, something that connected him to his beliefs, to his mother maybe, or to a priest who had blessed it. The mind needs anchors, and for a sailor in a storm, a little bronze dolphin was enough. Now, let us talk about the sounds. The Mediterranean night, even when calm, is full of sounds. The gentle lap of water against the hull, the creak of timbers, the distant call of a gull. But in a storm, the sounds change. They become layered, overwhelming. There is the howl of the wind, which is not a steady howl, but a series of shrieks and moans. There's the crash of waves, which are not regular but erratic, like a giant beating the ship with a hammer. There is the rattle of the rigging, the snap of ropes, the groan of the mast. And there are the human sounds, the shouting, the prayers, the crying of the slaves, who were often chained below and could not escape. And yet, somehow, the sailors slept. The brain learned to filter out the noise, to treat it as background. The brain focused on the one sound that mattered, the sound of the ship itself. Was it holding together? Was the wood singing a song of strain or a song of breaking? A sailor would listen, even in sleep, even in the deepest exhaustion. His ears never fully closed. He was always listening. And that brings us to the strange phenomenon of shared sleep. On a Roman ship, the crew often slept in a kind of huddle. It was not a decision, it was a necessity. The deck was cold, the wind was wet, and bodies, when pressed together, produced warmth. So the sailors would gather in a corner, perhaps against the starboard bulwark, and they would lie down, side by side, like spoons. They would drape a single large piece of canvas over themselves, if they had one. They would breathe together in the same slow rhythm. And in that huddle, the boundary between self and other softened. A man might dream that he was someone else, or that he was part of a larger animal. He might wake and find that his arm was around another man's shoulder, and he would not pull away. Because on a ship, at sea, in a storm, there is no privacy. There is only survival, and survival requires trust. You trust that the man next to you will not steal your cloak. You trust that he will wake you if the storm shifts. You trust that he will share his water, his food, his warmth. And that trust, over time, becomes a kind of love. Not romantic love, something older, something that comes from being afraid together. The Roman historian Tacitus tells a story of a shipwreck on the coast of Gaul. The survivors, he says, were found washed ashore, still clinging to each other. They had died holding hands, and the locals who found them said they looked like a family. And perhaps they were. The sea makes families out of strangers. It is one of its gifts. So as you lie here in your bed, think of that huddle. Think of the warm press of bodies, the smell of unwashed wool and salt and sweat. Think of the breathing, the slow rise and fall of chests. And think of the quiet words that passed between them in the dark, a whisper, a prayer, a joke, a promise. These men were not philosophers. They did not write down their thoughts. They lived and died in obscurity. But they slept together, and that is enough. Let us now move away from the ship, just for a moment, and consider the shore. Imagine the harbor of Ostia, at the mouth of the Tiber, where the Roman grain ships arrived. It was a busy place, noisy and chaotic. But at night, it could be quiet. The sailors would come ashore after a long voyage, and they would find a tavern or a warehouse, or simply a patch of sand. And they would sleep differently there. The ground did not move. The wind did not howl. The silence was a shock. Some of them could not sleep at first. They had grown so used to the motion of the ship that the stillness made them dizzy. They would lie on their backs, staring at a ceiling that did not rock, and they would feel a kind of vertigo. Their bodies had adapted to the sea, and the land was a stranger. It took days for them to adjust, and even then, they would sometimes wake in the night, reaching for a rope that was not there. That is a strange thing to consider. For these men, the ship was home. The storm was normal. The land was the exception. So when we think of them sleeping through a storm, we must remember that they were not suffering. They were doing what came naturally. They were at home. The storm was just the weather of their home. And sleep was the way they passed the time. We will not end here. The night is long, and there is more to explore. But for now, let the image of that harbor settle. Let the lights of the torches, the smell of fish and pitch, the sound of water lapping against dock pilings, let all of it drift into your mind softly, like a dream. And then let it fade. And let yourself be back on the ship, in the storm with the sailors. Feel the cold wood, hear the wind, and know that you are safe, because the storm will pass. It always passes, and the sailors will sleep again under a clear sky with the stars overhead. And you will sleep too here in the quiet of your room, with the story wrapping around you like a warm cloak. Breathe in, out. The sea is far away. The storm is a memory. You are here and you are drifting, and that is all that matters. But let us not leave the ship entirely. The storm may have passed, but the night is still young, and there are other nights to consider. The sea does not come all at once. It settles slowly, like a great animal catching its breath. The waves grow smaller, the wind drops to a whisper, and the rain becomes a drizzle, then a mist, then nothing. And in that quiet, the sailors who have been awake since the first gust now feel the weight of their exhaustion. They slump against the mast. They lean on each other, their eyes close without permission. And this is when the second kind of sleep begins. Not the terrified, fitful sleep of the storm, but a deep, unconscious collapse. It is the sleep of the body giving up. And it is dangerous, because a man who sleeps too deeply after a storm might not hear the next change in the weather. But the body does not care. the body demands its rest, so the watch system becomes essential. On a Roman ship, the crew was divided into watches, usually 2 or 3 groups. One group would stay awake while the others slept. The watch lasted for a few hours, measured by a water clock or by the position of the stars. During a storm, the watch was doubled, sometimes tripled, with every able hand on deck. But after the storm, the captain would rotate the watches again, giving each man a chance to sleep in shifts. It was not a perfect system. The sleeping men were often woken by a shout or a sudden lurch, but it was better than nothing. And the men who were on watch had the hardest job: to stay awake when every muscle ached and the warmth of sleep called to them like a siren. They would talk to each other, or sing, or chew on strips of leather to keep their jaws moving. They would slap their own faces, pinch their arms. Some would count the stars. Others would tell stories about women they had known, or about ports they had visited, or about other storms they had survived. The stories were always the same, but they were comforting. And that was enough. Now let us consider the captain. He was often a veteran sailor, a man who had spent decades at sea. He knew the signs of a storm before the clouds appeared. He could feel the change in the air, the little shift in the wind, and he slept differently from the crew. He had a small cabin if the ship was large enough, a space perhaps 6 feet by 4, with a low ceiling and a wooden door that could be barred from inside. Inside the cabin, there might be a narrow bed, a chest for his belongings, and a small oil lamp. The bed was a simple frame of wood, with ropes stretched across it to support a thin mattress stuffed with straw or wool. It was not soft. It was hard and lumpy, but it was off the deck. It was dry, and it was his own. That made a difference. The captain could close his door and be alone for a few hours in a way the crew could not. But he also carried the weight of command. He could not sleep deeply. He listened always for the sound of trouble, the shout of the lookout, the change in the wind, the cry of a man overboard. His sleep was a shallow thing, a nap stretched thin over the hours of darkness. And sometimes, in the middle of a storm, he did not sleep at all. He stood on the stern, wrapped in his cloak, staring into the dark, feeling the ship respond to his slightest touch on the steering oar. He was the ship, and the ship did not sleep. But even the captain needed rest, and there were times when he would hand the steering oar to his most trusted pilot and go below. He would lie on his bed, fully clothed with his boots on. He would close his eyes and let his mind drift. He would think of his wife, if he had one, or his children, or the home he had not seen in months. He would think of the cargo he was carrying, the grain that would feed Rome, the wine that would make men happy, the olive oil that would light lamps. He would think of the profit or the loss, and then slowly he would fall into a sleep that was not quite sleep. It was a half-life, a suspended state, where the sounds of the ship merged with his dreams. He might dream he was walking on land, or flying over the waves, or sinking into a warm sea. And then a creak would wake him, and he would be up again, checking the rigging, giving orders, doing the work that never ended. Now, let us move to the rowers. On a Roman warship, the rowers were often slaves or convicts, chained to their benches. They slept in shifts, just like the sailors, but their sleep was different. They did not have the freedom to move. They did not have a cloak or a pillow. They sat on hard wooden benches, with their feet braced against a footrest, and they slept in that position, hunched over, their heads nodding forward. The oar was still in their hands. They could not let go. If they dropped the oar, they would be beaten. So they slept with the oar grasped loosely, their fingers remembering the motion. They breathed in rhythm with the sea, and when the storm came, they could not leave their benches. They were chained in place. The water would wash over them. The ship would pitch and roll, and they would be thrown against each other, their chains clanking. They would pray, some of them, to whatever gods they remembered from their homelands. Others would cry. Some would be silent, staring straight ahead, waiting for the end. And then, when the storm passed, they would sleep, still chained, still hunched, their dreams filled with the sound of waves and the smell of salt. It is a hard thing to imagine, that kind of sleep. But it happened, day after day, night after night, for voyages that could last weeks or months. The human body adapts. The mind finds a way to rest even in misery. And the rowers, like the sailors, learned to sleep through anything. They slept through the shouting. They slept through the rain. They slept through the pain in their backs and the cramps in their legs. They slept because there was no other choice. And sometimes in their sleep they smiled, because sleep is the one place where the chains cannot follow. In sleep they were free. Now let us talk about the food that helped them sleep. Yes, food. On a Roman ship, the diet was simple: hardtack, a biscuit made from flour and water, baked twice to dry it out. It was hard and brittle, and often infested with weevils. But it was filling. There was also wine, mixed with water to stretch it, and sometimes vinegar. There were olives, dried fish, and if the crew was lucky, a bit of cheese. And there was a dish called pools, a kind of porridge made from wheat or spelt, cooked with water and salt. It was bland and thick, and it filled the stomach. And a full stomach, even a stomach full of weevily biscuit and thin wine, is a help to sleep. The body needs fuel to rest. So the sailors would eat their simple meal, sitting in a circle on the deck, sharing a common pot. They would dip their bread into the broth. They would chew slowly. They would say little. And then, when the meal was done, they would curl up and sleep. The food settled, the warmth spread, and the storm, if it came, was just an interruption. But there is also the matter of drink. The Roman sailors drank wine, but they also drank beer in some regions, and water when they had it. Water, however, was a problem. It went bad quickly, becoming slimy and foul. So they drank wine or vinegar to kill the taste and the bacteria. And a little wine, not too much, can help a man sleep. It dulls the sharp edges of fear. It softens the cold. It makes the ship feel less like a prison and more like a cradle. But too much wine is dangerous. A drunken sailor cannot be trusted. So the wine was rationed, measured out by the captain or the quartermaster. Each man got a small cup, perhaps twice a day. And that cup, sipped slowly, was a comfort. It was a ritual. It was a signal that the day was done and sleep could begin. Now, think of the night after a storm. The sky clears. The stars come out, one by one, like candles lit in a dark room. The sailors who are off watch gather in the bow, the front of the ship, where the motion is gentlest. They spread out their wet cloaks, trying to dry them. They lie down side by side, their heads resting on coils of rope. They look up at the stars. The Milky Way spreads across the sky, a river of light. Some of them know the constellations, the bear, the ship, the fish. They use them to navigate, but also to dream. They imagine they are sailing among the stars, away from the sea, away from the storm, away from everything. And as they drift, they hear the soft sound of the waves, no longer angry, but gentle like a lullaby. The ship rises and falls in a slow rhythm. The wind is a whisper, and they sleep. This is the sleep that is most precious, the sleep after danger has passed, the sleep of relief. The body lets go of all the tension, all the fear, all the effort. It sinks into the deck as if into a feather bed. And the dreams that come are soft and strange. They are dreams of green fields, of warm fires, of mothers singing. They are dreams of land, because land is the ultimate dream of every sailor. Land is where sleep is deep and safe and endless. Land is where the storm cannot follow. We have wandered a long way from the harbor, but we will return. Imagine the Roman port of Puteoli near Naples, where the great grain ships from Alexandria arrived. The harbor was a forest of masts. The docks were piled with amphorae and bales of cloth and sacks of spices. And in the evening, the sailors would come ashore, stumbling on legs that had forgotten how to walk without rolling. They would find a tavern or a bathhouse or a lodging house, and they would pay for a room, a small room with a bed, a real bed, with a mattress and a blanket. They would lie down, and the stillness would feel unnatural. They would miss the motion. They would lie awake strangely for hours, and then they would fall asleep, and they would sleep through the night, through the morning, through the afternoon. They would wake only when hunger or thirst or the call of the ship pulled them back. And they would remember that sleep, that deep, quiet land sleep, for weeks afterward, when they were back at sea, in the storm, huddled under a wet cloak, dreaming of a bed that did not move. So we come back to the ship always. The sea is the sailor's home. The storm is his weather, and sleep is his companion through all of it. You are lying in your bed now, warm and dry. The sounds of the night are soft around you. Perhaps you hear a car outside, or a dog, or the hum of a refrigerator. These are the sounds of your world, your harbor, and you can let them fade as we let the sounds of the storm fade. You can breathe slowly in and out and feel the weight of your body against the mattress. You can imagine the sailors, the rowers, the captain, all of them sleeping after the storm, their faces relaxed, their hands open. They are not dreaming of anything bad. They are dreaming of tomorrow, of a clear sky, of a warm sun, of a meal that is not hardtack. They are dreaming of home, wherever that is. And you are dreaming too, or nearly dreaming, with the story wrapping around you like a shroud of stars. Breathe. In, out. The sea is far away, but the sailors are not. They are here in the quiet of your mind, sleeping peacefully. And you can join them now. Let the weight of the story pull you under, soft and slow. There is no rush. The night is long, and the words will keep coming, like waves on a shore, gentle and endless. And then, when you are ready, you will sleep. And in your sleep, you will sail. And the storm will be a distant memory, a story you tell yourself, a dream within a dream. But for now, let us stay with the sailors just a little longer. Let us watch them wake, one by one, as the dawn begins to color the sky. The first light is gray, then pink, then gold. The clouds are gone. The sea is flat like glass, and the sailors stretch and yawn and smile. They smell the air. It smells clean and fresh, washed by the rain. They see land on the horizon, a thin line of green. They know they will make port before nightfall. And they feel a quiet joy, not loud, not excited, but deep and steady. The joy of survival, the joy of another day. And they begin to work again, coiling ropes, checking sails, preparing the ship for arrival. But they carry the sleep with them, the good sleep, the sleep that heals. And they will carry it for the rest of the voyage, until the next storm comes, or the next calm, or the next night under the stars. And so we leave them, the Roman sailors, sleeping and waking, dreaming and working, moving through the endless rhythm of the sea. They are gone now, long gone, their bones at the bottom of the Mediterranean, or in the soil of some forgotten port. But their sleep lives on in the stories we tell, in the way we curl up in our beds when the wind blows, in the way we hold onto something warm and familiar when the world feels too big. They are with us, somehow, these ancient men, sleeping through the storm, trusting the ship, trusting each other, trusting the night. And as you lie here, listening, you are part of that trust. You are part of that long chain of sleepers, stretching back through time, all of us resting together in the dark. So let the final image be this: a Roman ship, small and dark, rising and falling on the quiet sea. The storm has passed. The stars are out. The sailors are asleep, huddled together under a single canvas. One of them, a young man from Hispania, stirs in his sleep and murmurs a word in his native tongue. It sounds like a name. Perhaps it is his mother's name or his lover's. No one hears it. The wind carries it away, and he settles back into sleep, his face peaceful, his hand resting on the shoulder of the man beside him. And the ship sails on through the night toward the dawn. And you, in your bed, sail with it, drifting, floating, sinking into the deep, quiet sleep that has no end. Rest now. The story is over. The sailors are dreaming, and you are dreaming too. But perhaps the story is never truly over. The sea has many nights, and many sailors, and many sleeps. Just when you think the last sailor has closed his eyes, another ship appears on the horizon, another storm gathers, another huddle of men curls up under a wet cloak. The Mediterranean is vast, and its nights are endless. So let us stay a little longer, drifting in the quiet between waves. Let us watch another kind of sleep, one that happens not after the storm, but before it, in the tense, breathless calm that precedes the gale. You see, Roman sailors had a kind of sixth sense for weather. They watched the sky, the color of the clouds, the behavior of birds, the smell of the air. When they felt a storm coming, they did not wait for it to arrive. They prepared. And part of that preparation was a strange, hurried sleep. The captain would order the crew to rest while they could, even if it was the middle of the day. "Sleep now," he would say, "because tonight you will not sleep at all." And so the sailors would lie down wherever they could, on the deck, in the hold, in the shadow of the mast, and try to fall asleep before the wind came. It was a sleep of necessity, not of peace. It was a sleep with one eye open, a sleep that listened. Imagine a sailor named Lucius, a man from Ostia, the port of Rome. He had been at sea for 10 years. He knew the signs. The sky had turned a greenish gray, and the gulls had flown inland. The captain had ordered the sails shortened. Now there was nothing to do but wait. Lucius found a spot near the stern where the deck was slightly drier. He pulled his cloak over his head and closed his eyes, but he did not truly sleep. He drifted, half awake, his mind listening for the change in the ship's motion, the first gust that would tell him the storm had arrived. His body rested, but his soul remained alert. This is the sleep of the sentinel, the sleep of the hunted. It is a shallow sleep, a sleep that does not refresh. And yet, even this shallow sleep was precious. It gave the muscles a few moments of release. It gave the eyes a rest from the harsh light. It gave the mind a brief escape from the looming fear. And when the storm finally hit, Lucius would be a little stronger, a little sharper, because of that stolen rest. The Romans understood the value of a catnap, a quick reset. They called it meridiatio, the midday rest, but at sea it could happen at any hour. It was a survival skill. Now, there is another kind of sleep that deserves our attention, and that is the sleep of the captain. The captain of a Roman merchant ship or a naval vessel carried a heavy burden. He was responsible for the ship, the cargo, the crew. He could not afford to sleep deeply, so he developed a habit of sleeping in short bursts, often with his head resting on a folded cloak on the steering platform. He would wake at the slightest change in the wind, at the cry of a lookout, at the groan of a timber. His sleep was like a candle burning low, always flickering, never going out. Some captains had a small cabin in the stern, a cramped space with a wooden bench for a bed, but in stormy weather, they rarely used it. They preferred to stay near the helm, feeling the ship, listening to its breath. There's a story, perhaps apocryphal, of a Roman captain named Gaius, who sailed from Alexandria to Rome with a cargo of Egyptian grain. His ship was caught in a fierce storm off the coast of Crete. The waves were mountains. The wind howled like a beast. The crew was terrified. Gaius, however, remained calm. He ordered the men to tie themselves to the ship with ropes. Then he sat down on the deck, his back against the mast, and closed his eyes. The crew thought he had lost his mind. But Gaius was not sleeping. He was meditating, focusing his mind on the image of a calm harbor. He was teaching his body to rest while the storm raged around him. After a few minutes, he opened his eyes and gave new orders. The men, seeing their captain so composed, felt their own fear lessen. They worked with renewed strength, and they survived the night. Gaius's sleep was not physical rest, but a kind of mental discipline, a practice of stillness in chaos. The Romans admired this quality. They called it constantia, steadiness. It was a form of courage. But let us move now from the captain to the humblest sleepers on the ship, the rowers. On a Roman warship, the rowers were often slaves or prisoners of war. They sat on benches, sometimes 3 men to an oar in the dark, cramped hold. Their sleep was a brutal affair. When the ship was at anchor or sailing under wind power, the rowers were allowed to rest. But there was no comfortable place to lie down. They had to sleep on the benches, curled up on the narrow wooden seats, their backs against the hull. Sometimes they slept in shifts, one man resting while the other 2 pulled. The hold smelled of sweat, bilge water, and the sour breath of 100 men. It was hot in summer, cold in winter. There was no privacy, no quiet. The sound of the oars dipping and the captain's drumbeat was always in their ears, even in dreams. Yet the rowers also found ways to sleep. They learned to sleep with their eyes open, staring at the same plank, their minds drifting far away. They dreamed of their homes, their families, the fields they had left behind. They dreamed of freedom. And sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, when the ship was becalmed and the sea was like glass, they would sing low songs, songs in languages the officers did not understand. Those songs were lullabies for themselves. They sang to the rhythm of the waves, and one by one they would fall asleep, their heads nodding forward, their hands still gripping the oar. The overseer, if he was kind, would let them sleep a little longer. If he was cruel, he would crack his whip. But even the whip could not stop them from dreaming. Now, I want to tell you about a very different kind of sleep, the sleep of the passenger. Roman ships sometimes carried passengers, merchants, pilgrims, soldiers, wealthy travelers. They paid for a place on deck, or if they had money, for a small cabin. But on a stormy voyage, the accommodations were miserable. The passengers huddled together, seasick, scared, clutching their belongings. They could not sleep. The motion of the ship made them dizzy. The sound of the wind and waves was terrifying. They would beg the sailors for reassurance, but the sailors had little time for pity. So the passengers learned to sleep in fits and starts, leaning against each other, wrapped in woolen cloaks. They would doze off for a few minutes, then wake with a jolt as the ship lurched. They would whisper prayers to Neptune or Isis, or whatever god they trusted. And slowly, as the night wore on and the storm exhausted itself, they would fall into a deep, exhausted sleep, a sleep of surrender. There is a letter that survives from a Roman woman named Julia, who traveled from Carthage to Rome in the 1st century AD. She wrote to her sister about the voyage. "The sea was angry," she wrote. "I thought I would die. But then a sailor gave me a piece of bread dipped in wine, and I felt a little better. He told me to close my eyes and imagine I was lying on the grass in my garden. I did that, and after a while I fell asleep. When I woke, the storm had passed and the sun was shining. I have never been so grateful for a sunrise." Julia's letter reminds us that the sleep of a passenger is a sleep of trust. You must trust the ship, the captain, the sailors, the gods. You must let go of control. And when you do, sleep comes, like a friend, to carry you through the night. Now, let us consider the sleep of the night watch. On a Roman ship, the night was divided into watches, each lasting about 3 hours. The sailors took turns standing watch, keeping an eye on the horizon, listening for danger. Those who were off watch were supposed to sleep, but it was never easy. The ship was alive with sounds: the creaking of timbers, the slap of waves, the cry of a nocturnal bird. And there was always the fear that the watch would not wake you in time, that you would miss your turn, that the captain would be angry. So the off-watch sailors slept lightly, their ears tuned to the sound of the watchman's footsteps, the call of all's well that echoed through the ship. The watchman himself did not sleep, of course. He stood or sat in the bow, staring into the darkness. Sometimes he would sing to himself to stay awake. Sometimes he would count the stars. He would watch the phosphorescence in the wake of the ship, the tiny creatures that glowed like fireflies in the water. He would think of his home, his family, the woman he loved, and he would fight the urge to close his eyes. The Romans had a saying: "The watchman who sleeps brings ruin to all." It was a heavy responsibility, but even the watchman could find a kind of rest in the monotony of the night, a trance-like state where his body was still, but his mind was awake. It was not sleep, but it was close. It was adrift. And then there is the sleep of the storm itself, the sleep of the ship. A ship, after all, is a living thing. It breathes, it groans, it settles. When the storm passes, the ship too rests. The hull stops straining. The mast stops bending. The ropes stop humming. The ship floats in the quiet water, waiting for the next wind. And the sailors, feeling this, sink deeper into their sleep, as if the ship were a mother, and they were children held in her arms. I want to tell you one more story, a story from a Roman historian named Pliny the Elder. He wrote about a ship that was caught in a storm so fierce that the crew gave up all hope. They tied themselves to the mast and prepared to die. But one old sailor, a man from Cyprus, did something strange. He lay down on the deck, curled into a ball, and fell asleep. The others thought he had lost his mind. But when the storm passed and they all survived, they asked him how he could sleep. He said, "I saw that nothing I could do would save us, so I decided to save my strength. I slept, and I dreamed of a calm sea, and when I woke, the sea was calm." His sleep was an act of faith, a surrender to the universe. The Romans did not have a word for this kind of trust, but they understood it. It was the wisdom of old sailors, the wisdom of those who have seen many storms and know that the sea is not always cruel. Now, you might wonder about the dreams of Roman sailors. What did they dream of? We can only guess. But from the few writings that survive, we know they dreamed of home, of green fields, of warm fires, of women with soft hands. They dreamed of food, of wine, of bread fresh from the oven. They dreamed of safety. And sometimes they dreamed of monsters, of sea serpents and giant squid, of ships swallowed whole. But those nightmares were rare after a storm, because the storm itself was the nightmare, and sleep was the escape. Let me tell you about a particular dream, one that was recorded by a Roman poet named Ovid. He wrote about a sailor who dreamed of a golden island, an island where the trees bore fruit all year round and the water was sweet. In his dream, the sailor walked on the shore, and the sand was warm beneath his feet. He felt at peace. When he woke, the ship was still at sea, but the memory of the dream stayed with him for days. He would tell the other sailors about the island, and they would ask him to describe it again and again. It became a shared dream, a story they told to comfort themselves. And on the worst nights, when the storm was howling, they would close their eyes and imagine that island, that golden shore, and they would sleep. This is the power of a dream, especially a shared dream. It binds men together. It gives them hope. The Roman sailors knew this. They would tell each other stories before sleep, stories of heroes and gods, of ships that sailed to the edge of the world, of lands where the sun never set. These stories were lullabies for grown men. They filled the darkness with images of light. And as the sailors drifted off, the stories became part of their dreams, weaving together into a tapestry of myth and memory. So you see, the sleep of a Roman sailor was not simple. It was layered with fear, hope, memory, and trust. It was a sleep that changed with the weather, with the mood of the captain, with the state of the ship. It was a sleep that could be shallow or deep, brief or long, peaceful or troubled. But it was always there, a constant companion, as constant as the sea itself. And now, as we near the end of our journey, let us return to the image of the ship after the storm. The stars are out. The sailors are asleep. The captain is standing at the helm, his hand on the tiller, his eyes on the North Star. He is not sleeping, but he is resting in a way that only a captain can rest. He is part of the ship, part of the night. And you, in your bed, are part of this scene too. You have been listening for a long time, and your eyelids are heavy. You have sailed with the Romans through storm and calm into the harbor of sleep. Let us go one step further. Imagine that you are on that ship. You are not a passenger, not a sailor, but a spirit, invisible, floating above the deck. You see the men below you, their faces relaxed, their breath slow. You see the captain, his eyes half closed, his lips moving in a silent prayer. You see the watchman, leaning on his spear, staring at the horizon, and you feel the peace that descends on the ship after a storm, a peace so deep that it seems to have weight, like a blanket. The ship glides through the water, and the water glows with starlight. The air is cool and clean. There is no sound but the gentle rush of the bow and the occasional sigh of a sleeping man. You drift lower, and you enter the dream of one of the sailors. He is dreaming of a garden, a small garden with a fountain and a fig tree. He is sitting under the tree, and a woman is bringing him a cup of water. The water is cold and clear. He drinks, and the woman smiles. He feels a love so pure it brings tears to his eyes. He wants to stay in this dream forever, but he knows he will wake. And when he wakes, he will carry the dream with him, like a seed planted in his heart. You leave the dream and rise again, above the ship, above the sea. The Mediterranean stretches out below you, dark and vast. Here and there, you see other ships, tiny lights moving slowly. Each ship carries its own sleepers, its own dreamers. They are all part of the same story, the story of men who cross the sea and lie down in the darkness and trust that morning will come. And now you return to your own bed, your own room. The sounds of the night are familiar. The hum of a distant car, the the soft tick of a clock, the breathing of someone beside you. Or perhaps you are alone, lying in the quiet, your hands resting on the covers. You can feel the memory of the ship's motion, a gentle rocking, as if you are still at sea. It is a pleasant sensation, a lullaby for the body. Breathe slowly. In, out. The Romans are gone, the ship is gone, but the sleep remains. It is the same sleep that has cradled humans for thousands of years. The sleep of the hunter, the farmer, the sailor, the child. You are part of that ancient lineage. You are a sleeper, like all the sleepers before you. And tonight, as you close your eyes, you join them. You sail on the same sea, under the same stars, into the same dream. Let the last image be the simplest. A man lying on the deck of a Roman ship, his head on a coil of rope, his hand open, his face turned to the stars. He is breathing evenly. The stars are not moving, but the ship moves beneath him. He is at peace. He does not know that 2,000 years from now, someone will think of him, will imagine his sleep, will feel the same peace. He does not need to know. He is asleep, and that is enough. The night is deep. The story has become a whisper. The sailors are dreaming. You are dreaming too. There is nothing left to say. Only the waves, only the wind, only the slow, gentle breath of the world carrying you home. And yet, even as you feel yourself carried home, there is one more memory that the sea holds, one more echo from the time of the Romans. It is not a loud memory, not a storm or a battle, but a soft one, a memory of a quiet night very much like this one, on a ship that carried a cargo of wine and olive oil from Sicily to Rome. The ship was called the Venus of Syracuse, and its captain was a man named Marcus. He was old, with a beard that had turned white from salt and sun, and his eyes were the color of the sea after a storm, pale blue and clear. On that night, the ship was becalmed. The sails hung limp. The water was flat and black, like a mirror made of ink. The sailors had nothing to do. They had eaten their evening meal of bread and dried fish, and they had drunk their ration of watered wine. Now they lay on the deck, looking up at a sky that seemed to have more stars than usual. Marcus sat on the stern, his pipe in his hand, but he did not light it. He was listening. The sailors began to talk softly, as men do when they are tired and the night is still. They talked about their homes. One man, a Greek from Rhodes, described his wife's garden, the smell of rosemary and thyme. Another, a young boy from a village near Naples, told them about his mother's soup, a thick soup with beans and pork, served with bread so fresh it steamed. A third man, a Syrian, said nothing, but he smiled, and his smile was enough. Then Marcus spoke. He did not raise his voice. He said, "I remember a night like this 50 years ago. I was a boy, serving on my first ship. We were off the coast of Crete. The sea was calm as this. The men told stories. One story, an old story, stuck with me. It was about a sailor who fell in love with a sea nymph. He saw her one night, dancing on the waves, her skin silver in the moonlight. He jumped overboard to follow her, but he never found her. He swam for 3 days, and when he was finally pulled aboard a passing ship, he could not remember his own name. He only remembered the sound of her laughter like tiny bells. The other sailors on that ship said he was cursed, but I think he was blessed. He had seen something beautiful, and it stayed in his heart. The sailors were quiet. They looked at the water, half expecting to see a nymph rise from the depths. But there was only the black mirror and the stars reflected in it. One of the men, the Greek, said, "Captain, do you believe in such things?" Marcus took a long breath. "I believe in the sea," he said. "I believe she is alive. She breathes, she dreams, she remembers. And sometimes she lets us into her dreams." The boy from Naples asked, "Do you think the sea dreams of us?" Marcus smiled. "Perhaps. Perhaps she dreams of the ships that cross her, of the men who sail on her. Perhaps she dreams of the storms that shake her and the calms that still her. And perhaps when she dreams of us, she dreams kindly. She lets us sleep." The sailors fell silent again. One by one, they closed their eyes. The boy curled up against a coil of rope. The Greek lay on his back, his hands folded on his chest. The Syrian lay on his side, his face hidden. And Marcus, the captain, remained sitting, his pipe still unlit, his eyes on the stars. He did not sleep, not yet. He was keeping watch, as a captain must. But he was at peace. And as the night wore on, the ship began to move. A gentle breeze came from nowhere, carrying the scent of thyme and rosemary, as if the Greek's wife had blown it across the sea. The sails filled softly, with a sound like a sigh. The ship glided forward, leaving no wake. The stars did not move, but the ship moved beneath them. And the sailors, in their dreams, felt the motion, and they smiled in their sleep. Now, you might ask, how did these men, after a day of nothing, a day of waiting and boredom, how did they fall asleep so easily? Because they were tired in a different way. They were tired of the endless calm, the stillness that felt like waiting. And when the wind came, even a breeze, they could rest. The waiting was over. The ship was moving again. They did not know where, but they trusted Marcus. They trusted the wind. They trusted the stars. This is a kind of sleep that is hard to describe. It is not the sleep of exhaustion, not the sleep of a man who has worked all day. It is the sleep of a man who has surrendered his will to the journey. He is not fighting the night. He is not worrying about the morning. He is simply existing, like a stone in a stream, letting the current carry him. The Romans called this kind of sleep somnus odiosus, the sleep of idleness. But it was not lazy. It was a sleep of deep trust. And that trust was not just in the captain or the ship. It was in something larger, something the Romans called Fortuna, the goddess of luck, and Neptunus, the god of the sea, and Somnus, the god of sleep himself. They believed that sleep was a gift, a small death that allowed the soul to wander. When a sailor slept, his soul could leave his body, could fly over the waves, could visit his home. Some sailors told stories of waking with salt on their lips, as if their soul had tasted the sea during its flight. There is a Roman writer, a man named Petronius, who wrote about a sailor who slept for 3 days straight after a terrible storm. When he woke, he was changed. He could not speak for a full day. His eyes were distant. The other sailors thought he had seen the underworld, and perhaps he had. The sleep of exhaustion can be a journey to the edge of death. But the sleep of trust, the sleep of a becalmed night, is a journey to the heart of life. So let us linger on this becalmed ship, the Venus of Syracuse. The breeze continues, soft and steady. The stars are fading. The sky is turning gray, then pink, then gold. The sun is rising. One by one, the sailors wake. They stretch. They yawn. They look at the calm sea, the clear sky. They see Marcus still sitting on the stern, his pipe now lit, a curl of smoke rising. He nods to them. "Good morning," he says. "The wind is with us. We will reach Ostia by tomorrow night." The sailors smile. They feel rested. They feel ready. But you, listening, do not need to wake. You can stay in this twilight between the becalmed night and the golden morning. You can stay on the ship, even as it sails into the dawn. The sun is warm on your face. The air smells of salt and wood. The sound of water is constant, a gentle lapping. The sailors are moving about, but their movements are slow, unhurried. They are not in a rush. They are living the rhythm of the sea. Now let me tell you about another night, a night that was not so calm. This night a storm came, but it was a small storm, a quick squall that passed in an hour. The sailors on a ship near the coast of Gaul saw it coming. They had time to prepare. They reefed the sails. They tied down the cargo. They took their positions. The captain, a man named Decimus, stood at the helm, his legs braced, his eyes on the waves. The rain came first, a cold, hard rain that stung like needles. Then the wind. The ship heeled over and the deck tilted. The men held on. They did not panic. They had been through many storms. This one was just a squall. But in the middle of the storm, something strange happened. The rain stopped, suddenly, as if a curtain had been drawn. The wind dropped. For a few seconds, there was absolute silence. Then a single wave, larger than the others, rose up and crashed over the bow. It swept a young sailor off his feet. He was thrown against the mast. He hit his head. He lay still. The storm passed. The ship righted itself. The sailors rushed to the young man. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but he was alive. They carried him below deck, into the dark, damp hold. They laid him on a blanket. The ship's doctor, an old man from Alexandria, cleaned the wound and stitched it. The young sailor did not wake. He was in a deep sleep, not a natural sleep, a sleep of injury. The doctor said, "Let him rest. His body is healing." For 3 days, the young sailor slept. The ship sailed on. The other sailors took turns watching him, wiping his face with a damp cloth, giving him water when he stirred. On the 3rd night, he opened his eyes. He looked around the hold at the ropes and the amphory, at the flickering lamp. He said, "I had a dream." The sailor who was watching him, an older man named Gaius, asked, "What did you dream?" The young sailor said, "I dreamed I was swimming. I was swimming through a sea of stars. There were no waves, no wind, just a current, and I was moving with it. I saw ships, but they were made of light. I saw men, but they were made of shadows. And then I saw a doorway of white light. I was about to go through it when I heard a voice. It said, 'Not yet, go back.' And I woke." Gaius nodded. He had heard such dreams before. They were dreams of the threshold, dreams that came to men who had almost died. The young sailor was lucky. He had been given a second chance. He closed his eyes again, but this time it was a normal sleep, a sleep of recovery. When he woke the next morning, he was hungry. He ate bread and cheese. He drank wine. He sat up. And within a week, he was back on deck, helping with the ropes. The other sailors did not treat him differently. They did not make him a hero. They did not pity him. They simply accepted that he had returned from a place they could not see. They knew that the sea takes and gives, and that sleep is the bridge between the two. Now, as you lie in your bed, think of that young sailor, his dream of a sea of stars, his second chance. Think of the trust that allowed him to sleep, even after the blow to his head. Think of the calm that follows the storm, the quiet that settles over the ship. You are not a sailor. You are not on a Roman ship, but you are on a journey through the night. And your bed is your ship. Your blankets are your sails. Your pillow is your helm. The wind is quiet. The stars are steady. You can close your eyes now. You can let the current take you. The Romans had a saying, dormit in altum, sleep in the deep. It meant not just sleeping on the open sea, but sleeping deeply, without fear, without worry. It meant giving yourself to the night, as the sailor gives himself to the sea. Let that be your thought, your only thought as you drift, dormant in altum, sleep in the deep. The deep is not a place of danger. It is a place of rest. The deep is the darkness that holds you, the darkness that rocks you, the darkness that tells you, in a voice as soft as the waves, you are safe. You are held. You are here, and here is enough. And so the night continues. The ship sails. The sailors dream. You dream too. The story does not end. It simply becomes quieter, softer, until it is no longer a story but a feeling, a warmth in your chest, a stillness in your limbs. The world is far away. The sea is close. And you are sleeping, sleeping in the deep, carried by the same wind that carried the Romans, carried by the same stars that guided them, carried by the same sleep that has held humanity for thousands of years. Now let us sail a little further into the night, to a different ship, a different storm. This one is not a quick squall, but a long, slow storm that lasts for 2 days. The ship is a grain freighter, the Isis of Alexandria, heavy with wheat and linen, bound for Rome. The captain is a man named Lucius, a veteran of 30 years, a man whose skin is lined like the bark of an old olive tree. He has seen storms that swallowed whole fleets, storms that turned the sea into a battlefield of waves. But this storm is not the worst. It is the kind that tests patience, not courage. The wind does not howl. It moans. The rain does not lash. It drizzles. The waves are not monstrous. They are sullen, rolling, relentless. For 2 days, the Isis of Alexandria is trapped in this gray world. The sailors cannot sleep in their usual spots. The deck is too wet. The hold is too damp. They huddle in the small cabin beneath the stern, a space no larger than a modern closet. They sit with their backs against the wooden walls, their knees drawn up, their heads bowed. The air is thick with the smell of wet wool, salt, and the faint sourness of unwashed bodies. A single oil lamp flickers, casting long shadows that sway with the motion of the ship. One of the sailors, a young man named Titus, is trying to sleep. He is not succeeding. Every time he closes his eyes, the ship lurches, and his stomach lurches with it. He is not seasick, not exactly, but he is uncomfortable. He shifts. He sighs. He opens his eyes and stares at the grain sacks stacked nearby. They look like bodies, like the dead. He knows this is a foolish thought, but the darkness makes everything strange. The sailor next to him, an older man named Junius, notices. He says, "You are thinking too much. Close your eyes. Let the ship move." It is like being rocked in a cradle. Titus laughs, a short, bitter laugh. "A cradle? This is a nightmare," Junius chuckles. "No, a nightmare is when the mast breaks. A nightmare is when the water comes in. This is just a storm. It will pass. And when it passes, you will be tired enough to sleep anywhere." Titus tries again. He leans his head against a coil of rope. The rope is rough against his cheek, but it is dry, and that is something. He listens to the sounds, the creak of timbers, the groan of the hull, the patter of rain on the deck above, the occasional shout from the lookout, muffled and unintelligible. These sounds become a rhythm, a lullaby of sorts. His breathing slows. His eyelids grow heavy. And then, without realizing it, he is asleep. He sleeps for 3 hours. He is woken by a change in the motion. The ship is no longer rolling. It is bobbing gently. The storm has passed. The sailors stir, stretch, and begin to move. Someone opens the hatch. Gray light spills in. The air outside is clean and cool. Titus climbs onto the deck. The sea is calm, covered in a mist that glows like pearl. The clouds are breaking, and a pale sun is shining through. He feels a strange lightness, a relief that is almost dizzying. The captain, Lucius, is at the helm. He looks at Titus and nods. "You slept," he says. "It is not a question." Titus nods. "I did." Lucius smiles, a thin smile. "Good. That is the hardest thing to do in a storm, to sleep. But you did it. Now you know you can." Titus feels a quiet pride. He has passed a test he did not know he was taking. This is a truth that the Romans understood. Sleep is not a luxury. It is a skill, a discipline, a gift that must be cultivated. The sailors who survived the longest, who sailed the farthest, were the ones who could sleep anywhere, anytime, under any conditions. They learned to nap in the short breaks between storms. They learned to trust their shipmates to keep watch. They learned to surrender to the moment, to let go of the need to control. And so, as the Isis of Alexandria continues its journey, the sailors settle into a kind of rhythm. They sleep in shifts. They eat when they can. They talk in low voices. The sun sets, and the stars return. The ship moves on, a dark shape on a dark sea, carrying wheat and linen and the dreams of men. Now let us drift to another ship, a smaller one, a fishing boat from the island of Delos. The fishermen are a family, 3 brothers and an uncle. They fish for tuna, for sea bass, for the purple dye that comes from the murex snail. They know the sea the way a farmer knows his field. They know the currents, the winds, the seasons. They know when to go out and when to stay in. One night, they are far from land. The sky is clear. The sea is flat. They have caught enough fish to fill the hold. They are tired, but they are not ready to return. The uncle, an old man named Nicias, says, "Let us stay here. Let us sleep on the water. The fish will wait." The brothers look at each other. They are young, restless, but they trust their uncle. They drop anchor. They lower the sails, and they sleep. The boat is small, no more than 20 feet long. They sleep in the open, on the deck, under the stars. They roll themselves in blankets made of wool, thick and rough. The boat rocks gently. The water laps against the hull. The stars are so bright they seem to touch the mast. There is no wind. There is no sound except the breathing of the men and the occasional splash of a fish. Nicias lies on his back, looking up. He is not sleeping. He is watching the stars, counting them, remembering the names his father taught him. He thinks of his wife, his children, his home on Delos. He thinks of the goddess Artemis, who watches over fishermen. He closes his eyes and whispers a prayer. Then he sleeps. In the morning, they wake to a sea of glass. The sun is rising, a red ball of fire. The fish are jumping. The brothers laugh. They pull up the anchor and sail home. The catch is good. The market will pay well. But the best part of the night, they will all agree later, was the sleep. The sleep on the open sea, under the stars, with the smell of salt and fish and the warmth of the wool blanket. And so, you see, the sleep of a Roman sailor was not always a sleep of fear or exhaustion. Sometimes it was a sleep of peace, of contentment, of being exactly where you were meant to be. The sea was not an enemy. It was a home. And sleep was not a retreat. It was a return. Now, as you lie in your own bed, perhaps you can imagine that small fishing boat. The stars are above you. The water is below. The world is quiet. You are not alone. You are with the fishermen, with Nicias, with the brothers, with all the sailors who have ever slept on the sea. Their sleep is your sleep. Their peace is your peace. The Romans had a word for this feeling, this gentle drifting between waking and dreaming. They called it inter somnum et vigilium, between sleep and waking. It is a place where time slows, where the mind softens, where the body becomes a vessel for rest. You are in that place now. You are between. You are not fully awake. You are not fully asleep. You are floating like the ship, like the fishermen, like the stars themselves. And so the story continues, though the words become quieter, softer, like the waves lapping against the hull. You may hear the voice of the narrator, but it is fading, like a sound carried away by the wind. You may feel the blanket over you, the pillow beneath your head. These are your sails, your anchor. You are safe. You are held. You are here. The Roman sailors knew that the best sleep came after the storm, after the danger had passed, after the ship had been secured. They called that sleep requies, a word that means not just rest, but renewal. It is the sleep that heals, that brings strength back to tired muscles and hope back to weary hearts. And so, as the last light of the podcast fades, let the requies settle over you. Let the storm of your day pass. Let the ship of your body find its harbor. You do not need to sail any further. You do not need to keep watch. The night is dark, but it is gentle. The sea is deep, but it is calm. Dormant in autumn. Sleep in the deep. The deep welcomes you. The stars are your guides. The wind is your lullaby. And when you wake, it will be to a new dawn, a new journey, a new story. But for now, there is only this, the soft rhythm of your breath, the warmth of your bed, the quiet of the night. Sleep now. Sleep like a Roman sailor. Sleep like the sea itself. But before we let you drift completely into that deep, let us linger a moment longer on the memory of one more sailor, one who never found his way back to shore. His name is recorded in a single line on a scrap of papyrus, discovered in the ruins of a house in Pompeii. The line reads, Gaius, sailor of the grain fleet, lost at sea, aged 22. We do not know where he was born, or what his laugh sounded like, or whether he had a sweetheart waiting for him in Ostia. All we know is that he sailed from Alexandria on a ship called the Serapis, and he never arrived. Perhaps his sleep came in the final hours before the storm overtook him. Perhaps he had been on watch the night before, staring at the same stars we have described, and he was exhausted. When the captain ordered all hands to prepare for rough weather, Gaius might have stolen a few moments to rest his eyes, curled in the narrow space between two amphorae of wine. He closed his eyes and let the motion of the ship carry him into a shallow, uneasy slumber. He dreamed of his mother, of the smell of bread baking in a clay oven, and then the dream was broken by a shout, a terrible crack, and the cold shock of water. We do not tell this story to frighten you. We tell it because even in the darkest outcome, there is a kind of grace in the surrender. Gaius did not die fighting the sea. He died because the sea took him, and he was asleep. The Romans believed that the god of sleep, Somnus, was the brother of death, Thanatos. They are twins, the poet said. One carries you gently into rest, the other carries you gently into silence. And the sleep of a sailor, especially in a storm, was always a little closer to that boundary. But for every Gaius, there were 100 sailors who survived, who woke to the sun, who lived to tell their children about the night they thought they would die. And in the telling, the fear turned into a story, and the story became a kind of prayer. They would say, I slept in the storm, and the gods watched over me. And the children would listen, their eyes wide, their bodies warm under wool blankets, and they would fall asleep themselves, dreaming of the great dark sea. Now, let us return to that place between sleep and waking, where you are now. The voice of the narrator has become as soft as the rustle of grain sacks, as distant as the cry of a gull far out at sea. You may hear the faint creak of a wooden hull, but it is only the house settling, only the ordinary sounds of your own safe harbor. You are not on the Isis of Alexandria. You are not on the tiny fishing boat of Delos. You are here in your bed, and the sea is only a metaphor now, a gentle wave that lifts and lowers you with each breath. The Roman poet Ovid wrote about the sleep that comes after weeping, after fear, after a long day of labor. He said that sleep is the best medicine, the one remedy that the gods gave freely to all humans, and the sailors knew this better than anyone. They did not have feather beds or soft pillows. They did not have warm blankets made of fleece. They had a coil of rope, a sack of barley, the hard deck, and the knowledge that the dawn would come. And that was enough. So let that enough be your guide tonight. You do not need perfect silence or the ideal temperature. You do not need to count sheep or drink warm milk. You only need to let go, to trust that the ship of your body will stay afloat, that the night will hold you, that the storm, if it comes, will pass. The Roman sailors had a saying, Navigare necess est, vivere non est necess. To sail is necessary, to live is not necessary. But they also knew that to sleep is necessary, because without sleep, the sailor cannot sail, and the sailor cannot live. And so, as you drift deeper, let the necessity of sleep fill you. Let it be as natural as the tide, as inevitable as the stars turning in their courses. You are a sailor now, on a ship that does not move, in a sea that does not threaten. The anchor is dropped, the sails are furled, the watch is kept by someone else, some gentle presence that asks nothing of you but stillness. Breathe in, and the air smells of salt and distant rain. Breathe out, and the tension leaves your shoulders, your hands, your jaw. The world is reduced to this, the rhythm of your breathing, the soft weight of the blankets, the slow turning of the night. There is no place to go, nothing to prove, no storm to survive. You are already home. The Romans called that feeling quiz, a deep and perfect peace. And it is yours now, as it was theirs, as it has been for every sailor who ever closed his eyes and trusted the sea. So close your eyes now. Trust the night. Sleep in the deep. Sleep like a Roman sailor. Sleep like the sea itself. And when you wake, you will find that the storm has passed, the grain has been delivered, and you are ready for the new day. Dormit in autumn. Requis in pace. Sleep in the deep, in peace. The story is over. The sea is silent, and you are asleep.